Okay, one more place to post it here. And there, we should be good. Okay, well, good afternoon. I am here today with Bill Spaun. He's one of the elders at the Sumner Church of Christ in Sumner, Washington. Bill is one of those people that I have been wanting to introduce to other people. So if you do not know him, he's the kind of person you want to know. He was instrumental in my conversion, although I'm not sure that he necessarily knew how instrumental he was, just in the kind of person he was. And when I walked in as a yet-to-be Christian to the Sumner Church of Christ building at the time, which is no longer there. That thing's been all torn down and you got a bigger place and everything. But he was the first person to greet me, and he greeted me with such kindness, and that so much so that I was even a little bit suspicious that people can't be possibly as kind as this. I thought, what's the real guy? Well, it turns out the real guy with Bill is just that same guy. He's just truly, sincerely one of the kindest people I have ever known in my life. And so as I've been looking at telling conversion stories, how people have become Christians, and using that as an opportunity for us to think about evangelism a little bit more, put it in the front of our mind instead of the back of our mind, and maybe look at some things that we find actually work with people. And what were the events that led to somebody becoming a Christian? He was one of the guys that I wanted to talk to. So Bill, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. I know you got like lots of family and grandkids and things that you could be spending your time with. So the fact that you're spending time with me is a pretty big deal. So thank you.
Hey, Scott, that's glad to do it. And, generous introduction there. Appreciate it. A lot to live up to, actually. But certainly do appreciate so much the chance to get here. I'm looking forward to sitting down and chatting with you and sharing some of these things. If I can be of any benefit to anyone, sure would be glad to. But I've treasured our relationship through the years. When you were part of the church at Sumner, that was encouraging time. And then when you went off and began serving as an evangelist, you've just been such a source of encouragement and example to all the people that I know. And I always hear your name coming up when I hear good things happening up north there. So thank you. Appreciate the time that we have together today.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to it. So maybe if you could just tell people just a little bit of your history, maybe, how long have you been a Christian? How old were you when you were converted? What was your family life growing up? Were your parents Christians, not Christians, that sort of thing? Just kind of get us into the beginning of where you came from.
Yeah, okay. So family moved to the Pacific Northwest, the Burien area, when I was about 2. My father died when I was about 2. And so my mother and my 2 brothers and I, we all moved up to the Pacific Northwest and moved in with my grandparents, my grandfather and grandmother. In a beautiful place. Well, actually, for a few years, we lived in Madrona, but then most of our young life, we grew up on the waterfront in Puget Sound there in the Burien area. So what a wonderful place for a kid to grow up. My front yard was the beach and the water. And so it was an idyllic life, really, for a kid. Just carefree, and mom was worked all the time. So it was grandmother that was sort of the one who raised us, my 2 brothers and I, up. And it was a very righteous background. We went to church as young people, and went to the Episcopalian church, actually, as my grandfather and my mother were Episcopalians. And so that was, some influence there. But when I turned about 12, I said, I don't really want to go to church anymore. So I didn't. And they said, okay. And so that was kind of my younger life there. And then at 18 is when I actually obeyed the gospel. And that came through basically a connection with my brother. My brother had met the woman that he was going to marry in high school. And when he got married, they were sharing with us some things about the Bible, and then eventually I agreed to obey the gospel, and I can tell you more about that in a minute. But at 18 is when I became a Christian, And then at 22, which is 45 years ago, is when I actually married the woman of my dreams, who at that time was Sue Dandurand. Her mother, Shirley Dandurand, I think a lot of people may know, members of the Berean congregation. So we've been married for 45 years. And most of that time we spent out here in Bonnie Lake and attending at the church at Sumner. And then over that period of time, we had 2 children, and now we have 6 grandchildren. So, and that's kind of a quick version of that.
Okay, so and life is good, huh?
Life has been really good, actually, and there, ups and downs, but no tragedies really that we've suffered that I could really say have been, life altering. So God has been gracious in many ways.
Good. Well, with your childhood, so you're growing up. Your grandfather is more of your father figure, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and he was a spiritual man. Something that I'll never forget. As much as we didn't agree on doctrine later on, it's hard to forget when you go to bed at night as you're going, as we're walking down the stairs to go to our bedroom. Grandpa was always over there kneeling by his bed praying. It was never a night that he didn't pray before he went to bed, and so that is something that you take with you. And later on, when you're exposed to more of a scriptural, spiritual awakening, I guess you could say, then those kind of things have an effect. So yeah, I grew up in a fairly spiritual family, I'd say.
Okay, so there was that, and it wasn't a negative impact, because sometimes you have that. Like one of the other people we were talking to, Buck Barrett, he grew up with a religious background, but it was more of a negative influence. But for you, it wasn't. There was a positive.
No, when I started getting exposed to New Testament Christianity, not something like the Episcopalian Church, which is built off a lot of traditions, but when I was being exposed to New Testament Christianity, there was no resistance, from our mother or from our grandfather. They were encouraged to see that we had we were, since we'd gone away, like 6 years ago, we weren't interested in going to church with them or anything, because we were kids and wanted to play on the beach. I mean, Sundays were for volleyball on the beach. Come on, Scott.
Sure. Well, and that kind of answers my next question, which is, at 12, when you didn't want to go anymore, what was the reason? It sounds like it was just you want to be a kid. That was boring.
Yeah.
Is that essentially it?
Yeah, and I think from the standpoint that, and again, I don't want to knock the Episcopalian Church, but it was pretty superficial. There wasn't really a lot of, let's go look at the Bible. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of rote and tradition, and it didn't really impact your life at that time very much. It may have changed since, but the particular congregation that we were a part of, it wasn't meeting any kind of spiritual hunger at the time. So, yeah.
Gotcha. So you didn't have a negative feeling towards it, but it wasn't meeting a need. It wasn't connecting you to the Bible. It was just simply something that everybody did. It was what your grandparents did, and then one day you didn't want to do what your grandparents do.
Yeah, exactly. It's just something that was done, and there wasn't really a deep drawing, to a better commitment. There just wasn't that focus there. That was something that I, learned later on.
So at 18, when you started studying, so was it your brother that you studied with, or was he kind of the intermediary contact there?
Well, he was always saying, why don't you just sit down and read the Bible, and so I started. And because my understanding I had formed this great philosophical truth in my mind that basically all that God cares about in religion is that you're sincere. I felt that was a pretty fair position. I mean, whether you called yourself a Christian, or if you were a Buddhist, or if you were a Jew, or whatever it was, so long as you were sincere in your belief, God would accept you, because that's all that mattered to him. Mm-hmm. Is my particular feeling on the fact. So I was sincerely unsure. So I figured that was okay with God. And
I really don't know what I'm doing, but at least I'm sincerely confused.
Exactly. And and at 18, my brother started saying, "No, look, now there's Christianity. Jesus says he's the way," and that kind of got the dander up, because I thought that was pretty narrow. Mm-hmm. Which later on I learned that's exactly what the way is. But at the time I go, well, man, if that's true, I better know if it's true or not. And so that's what started getting me, is that he would start saying, just take some time and read it. And so I started reading, and then also at the time, Sam Dawson, Brother Sam Dawson, who many know, he was there that I could around that I could ask questions to, and so as I started reading the Bible, I had a zillion questions. In fact, I have 2 full notebooks of questions before I actually became a Christian about, okay, what is this about? How this can't be right? This can't be true. This, how is it? And they would always answer my questions exactly to my satisfaction. So during a period of probably about, 10 months, as I was reading and questioning and still had my position, sincerity is all that matters. Then by reading the Bible and having good men like my brother and Sam and a couple others, Jack Eisman, Sr., who would sit there and answer my questions, I came to the conclusion that my position was wrong. Sincerity wasn't the only thing that was important. That was important, but the truth also mattered.
How long was that process for you? Sometimes it's hard to pin it down to an exact date, but from the point when you began to, okay, maybe I will look into this New Testament thing, and you started asking questions, to when you eventually did become a Christian, were baptized into Christ, and accepted, yes, I was sincerely wrong.
Yeah.
What was that period of time like? We took in 6 months? We talking 5 years? What?
Probably overall almost a year.
Okay.
And so it wasn't sitting down with somebody for 2.5 hours and having a conversion class. That didn't happen with me. If I was going to be convinced, it was going to be through some real investigation. And so, which kind of leads me to how I teach people today. I don't expect to convert somebody over a 3-hour class. I really don't. I don't want to, because I want them to really go through the process of discipling, and which is learning carefully as much as you need to know. You don't need to know a whole lot, right? But most people I talk to aren't like some people that are in the Bible who were Jews who were being converted necessarily, who already were spiritual people. They just had to figure out that Jesus was the Christ, right. Which wasn't, it wasn't as difficult. But so I take a little longer teaching people than maybe most would. It took me a while to really read. And the thing that made the difference too with me, I think, is that, and I was ready to make a commitment, is I really read the Bible. I read it. And I think everybody should. Not saying you can't have somebody come forward on a Sunday morning who's never read the Bible and say, I want to be baptized. I'm not saying you can't do that.
Right.
But I often will discourage people from making that commitment that quickly, because they really haven't counted the cost. They really don't know what they're doing. So maybe it's the preacher that was that influential, or that, dramatic. And so, yeah, with my own experience, it took time, and I learned a lot, had a lot of questions answered, and I was ready to make a commitment, and I never turned back. I think part of that is because I took the time to really make sure.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to you, is because I think that was pretty influential on me when I was first becoming a Christian. Was I saw your willingness to wrestle with things. See, you didn't teach what we might call our conversion class, but you actually did teach our beginning new Christians class when I was first converted. And it was a longer class. I mean, probably longer than most people would hold in for, I think, maybe sometimes now. We kind of expect things fairly quick.
Age, different day.
Maybe a different age, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
In your years.
But one of the things I was impressed by was the fact that you felt like people should wrestle through this stuff. I'm going to stop for a second here and deal with some blinds that the sun keeps moving on me. And then I'm hoping that
coming in and out of the clouds too, actually, right?
Yeah, right.
That's good. There's a little spot on your nose there. You're fine.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the blinds are only going to do so much. So this is pandemic Bible study here. So we work around it. But the idea that not everybody is going to be converted by a 1 hour or a 3 hour or even a one sitting sort of conversion class, I think is really important because
I think we skipped that part of they made disciples.
Yes.
Before they baptized them. And, I think we have this fear that, we got to get him in the water. We got to get him in the water. Well, sometimes when you get him in the water, you just get him wet. I mean, with a real superficial commitment. And disciples is, look at Jesus' disciples. You can see, they followed him and they were impressed pretty early on with the truth. But discipling, is a student, and a student needs to learn a few things. Yeah. And the best way to learn, if you can read, is to read the Bible.
Yeah.
I got it. You can teach the Bible, and that's important because reading it without a teacher, and I really felt like my brother and Sam Dawson and Jack Eisman were the teachers, because I would write all my questions down. And I really encourage new converts, people who are learning, to write down questions, because there's usually a question that goes, it can't be true, I'm done. Well, not if you get it answered properly. That's what teaching affected me, is they answered my questions, and every single doubt, was gone, and I didn't have any excuse. So I had to do what was right and what was good, what I felt was right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you don't feel coerced too, right? So instead of you feeling pressured into, we got to get him to the water, where there's a bit more salesmanship feel to it.
Yeah.
You're on a journey, and our job is to help facilitate that journey of you searching for truth. And we're not afraid of you being on that search. And I think that's a longer process, perhaps, than what we prefer. And maybe it takes a lot more time, but
I think it does. I think and you have to, then there's the counting of the cost part. Well, Jesus, when people were following him, he stopped in his tracks, turned around and said, look, you got to know something. You got to count the cost about this. And he gave a few examples of building a house and counting the cost, or going to war. And so that takes time to really measure that. You can't do that in I don't think in one day necessarily. You really have to say, hey, am I going to really willing to change my life completely and more drastically than I ever will again? And so, that takes a lot of consideration. So that's one of my favorite passages there about Jesus stopping them and saying, look, careful before you make this commitment.
Well, it's similar too to how Jesus was with the crowds that followed him for the food, right? You have that. They were following for the food, and he actually kind of drove them away with some hard teaching, because he was trying to filter out the ones who weren't really truly interested for the right reasons. And
they missed the point. All they saw was they missed the whole point. He was trying to show them life, spiritual life and then eternal life, and they saw the food. And I don't want people, when I teach them, just to see the water. Okay, here's my answer. All I got to do is get wet. All I got to do is get under the water and come out, and I'm good. No. That's not the new birth, born of water and the Spirit, right? So that spiritual birth process, I don't think is, and I'm not saying there's an exception to this, but I think that takes some time. You put a seed in the ground, and what do you put a seed in the ground, right? And what do? Go back in an hour and there it's bloomed? No, you have to wait, and you have to water some, and you have to, until it grows up. So until even sprouts, it takes a while.
Some people, by the time they get to you or I to study with them, that seed's actually been there for a while, and maybe we're down the road. But I still agree with the concept that it's not going to happen overnight. In fact, I'd be highly suspicious of somebody who was totally against God, then totally for God. The next day, what are the chances they're going to flip back the other direction real quick, right? I
think so. I think that's important, and I think that those who take time to make the decision stick around. My experience is they've thought it through well. They've counted the cost. They know where they're going. This isn't a flash in the pan, yay, I'm going to be, this is, it's resolute, and you don't give up those kind of decisions very easily.
And, I might add to this, Bill won't necessarily speak about this, but he has been very consistent in this worldview, because even when it came to your children, they were not baptized as young as some others were. I can't remember how old your son was when he's baptized, but he wasn't in the younger category. I remember thinking he had he was an older.
I think he was 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Let me check with my wife.
Yeah.
Hey, Sue,
Right.
how old were our kids?
But
He doesn't remember either. And that's strange because she always has those facts.
so, but let's say it's 15 or 16. We don't need an exact date, but that tends to often be a phase where sometimes parents can be getting worried. And I remember talking to you about that, and you just said, no, he's thinking about it. He's thinking it through. He's got to figure it out for himself. And he did, and is a fantastic Christian man, by the way. And I feel like that is part of it, is that what you found for you was you had to work through it. Then when you had children, you instilled that same idea of they're going to have to work through it. Yes. And that's a whole nother aspect of parenting, of being a Christian, is how does a Christian who has for themselves come to find the truth then facilitate their child finding it for themselves too. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I don't know that we necessarily have time for that, but yeah.
And everyone's different.
That's true.
There's some young people who are ready at like when Jesus was 12 years old, was in the temple and and just about his father's business. And there are people at that age and younger who are ready, I think. But I think there's that time period, and I think it lasts for a number of years, where some people take a bit longer to make that decision. And when if they make it sincerely from the study they've done, and that's definitely an individual thing. And for my children, it took a while. I was fine with that. I wanted them. I tend to think it's more of a young adult thing. So when you become a young adult, I don't, whatever. I think you're in trouble if you're 21 and you haven't obeyed the gospel yet, probably, because you get some examples on the Old Testament of people who were didn't go into the promised land, up to 21 years old. You have some of those indicators that by then you should have known. Right.
Yeah, no, and I get that. And I also agree with you. It's not a one size fits all thing, but I just, I think that
went blank there, Scott. Got a little bit of pause here. I'm not sure if we're down or what. Oh, you're back.
Yep. There we go.
There?
Okay.
What happened?
Yeah. The internet age. And so it's not perfect. We're kind of, the world is seeing and testing how far the internet can stretch right now.
I'm amazed it's stretching this far.
Yeah, me too, honestly. Yeah. So you do this process of discipleship, of studying, reading it for yourself, asking questions, and it takes roughly a year. Was there a point that you remember where it clicked? Because I find it seems there are two categories. There's some people that go, this was the moment and I saw it and I knew. And other people, it was more like a slow wading into the light. I don't know the moment where we went from darkness to light, but it definitely happened. Yeah. Which one was it for you?
It was a slow way. It was a slow process. Yeah, it was just becoming more and more convinced. And again, I emphasize, by reading the Bible, when you read about the life of Jesus Christ, and I read through the Gospel of Matthew, and then through Acts, and then through the letters, all the things added up. This couldn't have been something that was made up by man. Jesus is so much more than a man. And it became so obvious that I couldn't decide. I mean, the question was gone, whether or not sincerity was the only thing that mattered. It wasn't. It was, I'm the way and the truth and the life. And he is, and he was back then for me. And so it was a while. There wasn't any particular passage or something. There were a number that were influential. John 4:24, God's a spirit. They that worship me must worship in spirit and truth. I mean, that rang all the time in my head as I was thinking. It's not just about sincerity, the spirit part of it, and it's the truth, and the other way around as well. It's not just the truth. You really have to be convicted from the heart and about the truth and willing to do, what God wanted to. So, yeah. Reading the Bible, that's the thing. I mean, or listening to somebody else read it if you can't read.
Yeah.
That
Well,
works.
and I think you bring up a really good point that there's such a distinction between hearing somebody else talk about the Bible, even if what they're saying is right,
Mm-hmm.
and reading it for yourself. They're just not the same thing.
They're not. And I think, again, I'm not trying to exclude those they've obeyed the gospel because of the lessons they've heard, because that also,
Nor am I, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, that works. But when you read it yourself, I mean, it says faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God, whether you're reading it and hearing it or whether you're being told it. I mean, I think we can pretty well be assured that people who were hearing it at the time of the apostles' teaching in Acts didn't have copies of the Bible. They had the Old Testament, but they were hearing it. They were hearing preachers talk. That was the only way they learned until the scriptures were being written. So you can't say that's not a very important way. That's how people were being converted. But I think too, the process, take enough time to learn whichever way you choose, hearing or reading, to be convicted, to be convinced, and don't rush that.
Mm-hmm. Well, which is maybe brings me to one of my other questions is, as you have been at this for a while now, it's been, I think you said 45 years since you and Sue got married. So longer than that you've been
48 years since I've been a Christian. Yeah,
48 years since you've been a Christian. So you're coming up on half a century of Christianity under your belt.
Ooh, wow. Do I feel like I've done everything I should through those years? No, that there's a lot more to do.
As you look at Christians today and evangelism today and what churches are doing today, and the culture that we're in today, I mean, this is kind of a broad question. What do you, and part of this I ask because you're an elder as well, what do you wish for Christians to know about evangelism? What do you wish was happening? Or what are you particularly encouraged by that you see happening? I find a lot of times we can be both pragmatic and realistic about the problems and also optimistic. So maybe it's both for you.
It's kind of funny. It's sort of a two-part thing. I think people are less involved with each other today than they used to be. Part of it's technology. People are, and it's hard to do much influence over technology, right? I mean, having, texting and whatever, chatting on that kind of stuff, it's hard to get anywhere deep with people. It's just the immediate things you're exchanging. So that technology kinds of hurt. That technology in that way kind of hurts the where we used to have more gathering with people or at a park or talking or visiting in that way. So we have less of that. So you've got less opportunity, I think, today than it used to be when I was young anyway. Mm-hmm. And but on the other hand, I think you've got more people who have struggles today. I mean, their lives, there are more people whose lives are really messed up, and having challenges. And so there's actually more opportunity there because people are looking for solutions. And that's what you want is people. I mean, that's one of the easier people to reach, are people who are looking for an answer, to my life that I don't like. And so you put both those together, and basically it's just taking the opportunities, I think, that come up with people that you meet and looking for ways to make a Jesus at the well with the woman moment, that you can bring Christ in, into it, bring in spiritual things. And most people are fairly receptive to that. Whether you go on very far beyond that, at least you've sown a seed, right? Mm-hmm. That so I look at it as being just two ways. Is that we have less opportunity because of a technology that kind of makes us not so close, and but because this world is just getting more and more godless, this nation, you have more and more people because of that who are struggling with their lives and looking for some answers.
And that's fair. And I think you've got a good point about technology. I mean, the irony is technology right now at this exact moment is bringing us together, right? Yeah, but as a general rule, it's not, right? It's better than nothing. But but there's no substitute for face-to-face. I think about how John even talks about that with the atrophies, and he says, I'll come and I'll speak to him face-to-face. And actually that phrase face-to-face shows up quite a bit in the New Testament as being kind of what I view as the preferred method. And technology is great that it opens doors, but sometimes it's a shallower level of communication than when we're right there with each other and able to have a full conversation. But I like also how you point out the need for that has increased.
Yeah, I think so.
So if we recognize, people aren't getting much face-to-face interaction, and then we can be that, there's actually a lot of opportunities. And you're right, as people turn away from God, there's going to be problems with that. It's not like that is a consequence-free decision, is it?
No. And, it's turning every opportunity. And I'm saying that I'm doing a great job at this. I can do much better. But I know of a number of times where I've tried pretty hard, just meeting somebody at the park, which is hard to do today, at least at this immediate time. But sitting down and talking about things come up, like this guy that was into 3D printing. And actually, this is one of the things that kind of got me into that little hobby with my grandkids. He'd talk about a little about 3D printing, and I led it into a conversation about Christ. It wasn't difficult to do. It was, and we talked about that, and it didn't go much farther, but there was a seed sown. So those kinds of opportunities, when you have a few minutes with somebody, and it's if you look for ways, and again I say Jesus says at the well moments. I really think a lot about that example. It's just powerful in my life. They were just drawing water. Come on. Yeah. What is more mundane and everyday than that? And yet he used that to say something, to talk about something much more important than the water in the well.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it is, the key is to turn the normal everyday interactions into something more, because we as Christians understand there's something more.
Yes.
When to maybe backtrack just a little bit on your own conversion story, how much had you thought about things like heaven and sin and things like that until you started studying and reading the Bible for yourself? I mean, were those, when you thought in terms of religion growing up with the Episcopalian church and whatnot, were those kind of part of the conversation? Like, did you think about what happens when I die, or did that begin to happen more as you began to study?
Not much at all, I don't think. And that setting, it just wasn't, it was more ritual. Okay. What was better for me was sleeping outside on my bulkhead above the beach with my friends, looking up at the stars and talking about the stars. And we started talking about things like, okay, I mean, who made all those stars? And we had those questions going on in our heads. And eventually, all the fellows that were down there with like there's 3 different friends that we'd sleep outside with. I hold the record, by the way, in Puget Sound for sleeping outside. How many days in a row? I think it was like 3 months in a row without going inside. We slept outside. It sprinkled one time there. And anyway, so that's a different story. But all those guys over time became Christians. And so through a little bit different route, but through a similar process as a really...
So wait a second. So let me get this straight. You had a bunch of buddies that you as a young man were sleeping outside on the beach under the stars with.
Yeah.
And you systematically, all of you at some point became Christians.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
so you had like this stargazing philosophy club.
Well, sure. I mean, and I love astronomy to this day. I mean, you can't look out into that universe and not wonder, how did it get there? And of course, we were learning things about evolution at the time, and we had to think about that. And then we were hearing about, when we got a little older, got to be 18 or so, that we were thinking about, I don't know, my brother's saying that God made all this. Okay, which one happened? And so, but that's kind of the sort of the beginning of my searching. I needed to know. I need to find out.
So you guys are doing this, like, how old are you at that point when you're starting to do that?
I don't know, 13, 14 maybe, or something like that.
I love how God has designed us so well that even at 13 or 14, you can really begin to see a young person wrestle with that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not beyond the scope of what a young person can think about.
Right.
Because you're just sitting there, and for you, it's a practical thing. Here's all these stars. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Where'd they come from? And where'd I come from? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I love that you had this beachfront philosophy club that led to conversations. See, that's the sort of stuff that's going on in people's lives that we don't always know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And you know, you talk about how you transfer that to somebody else. I mean, but again, it's like, I think a Jesus at the well moment is that whatever they're talking about, there's some application, a spiritual application. And if there's a struggle that they're having, then, you know, it's not too difficult to say, you know, there's someone who knows exactly how to get through that. I'm not the person who knows exactly how to get through that, but I know of someone that knows exactly how to get through that and to make that, and to give you victory and success in that situation. A lot of times it's marriage troubles that people have, that there's so much in the scriptures to help people have a loving, happy, satisfied, successful relationship with their spouse. And people want to hear that. They want, I mean, because sometimes they're at divorce door. And so you know how common divorce is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's what a lot of people are struggling with out there. And it's like, and we know the answers to that. And they're not always easy, but we know what they are.
Yeah. And I think there's the key is, if somebody's at a spot where they really want the answers, even if they're not easy answers, there's a certain point where you want the answer, even if it costs a lot. And sometimes you have to get to that stage. But as the culture moves further away from God, we're seeing more people getting to that stage of really looking for some answers. And when you see other people who seem to have it figured out, and then they tell you it's God, you're willing to engage in that conversation a little bit more, I think.
I think so. And I think if your life is pretty stable and you look like you're a happy person, people are willing to listen. Because they know, they see people, you know, they know what they're like. They know the different, I mean, people see it all the time when they see you as who claims to be a Christian, who is happy with life. They want some of that. They really want some of that. They're desperate, actually.
Was that something that you were seeing? I mean, because we kind of talked about the doctrinal struggle that you went through in terms of just wrestling with the text, but were there elements of the kind of quality of people that you were seeing amongst the Lord's people that was making an impact in its own, you know, because they tend to be twin rails sometimes, right? There's the doctrinal part, but then there's these people too that you go, hey, I'm seeing some things in them that I don't see everywhere else. Yeah.
Well, my example of my older brother, Chris, if he ever listens to this is very much deserved. You couldn't have a more perfect older brother. I mean, he excelled in school, and once he became a Christian, he's been an excellent Christian from day one. And that example, that was just a great example to me. That was something. But then were the other people too. The people, when I began to meet some of the people at church that he knew, I saw their lives, what they lived, what they were like, and I could compare them with some of my buddies or friends that hadn't become Christians and what they were into, and how coming home from a college drunken all night party, what it did to their life. And I said, well, which one of these do I want?
Which one is not like the other, right? Yeah.
Which one looks better? That wasn't too hard to figure out that, you know, that the way and the truth and the life is the way and the truth and the life I really wanted. And I think we can help others to see that too.
Yeah. One of the things that, and I've noticed as we've talked, you brought it up several times, John 14:6, where Jesus says, I'm the way and the truth and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. That would be a verse that I think many Christians might have a tendency to avoid because of its exclusive nature. You know, we're kind of told don't push politics, don't push religion, right? So these are kind of the no touch buttons. But
pretty
for
politically
you,
incorrect statement, right? Today,
exactly, it's very much incorrect politically.
Yeah.
But it was the truth, and it seems like that you, instead of avoiding that by engaging in that conversation and discussion, that's actually what led to your investigation. It was a hard statement, and I think you even said you initially didn't like it so much, or at least it hit you wrong.
No, because I knew right off the bat that my Sundays were gone. Then. If I was Christian, forget beach volleyball or swimming. I knew it was going to be Sunday mornings, and these guys actually went Sunday nights too, which I was never going to do. But anyway, and Wednesdays, they had Bible class, and I'm thinking I'm just calculating all the things I'd have to give up, as a young man, guy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's fair. When we're teaching people truly about following Christ, we should recognize we are asking them to give up and change a lot.
And I don't think we want to soften that. I think we don't want to make Christianity an easy thing, because it isn't. We don't want to portray it as that. This is a challenge, but I asked the question, I said, if you were convinced that Jesus is the Son of God, would you do what he said?
Yeah.
And that just, I really challenge. If you're not convinced now, that's fine. But if you were convinced, and I've never had somebody say, well, no, I wouldn't, getting them to spend some time looking at it. It wasn't always easy, but they were rational people, and they just hadn't been convinced. And so that's kind of been my approach sometimes to people too, is that, just challenge. I'm not afraid of a challenge or challenging other people.
Yeah.
Because Christianity is a huge challenge, as far as the decision you need to make.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Trying to dilute that down is not a good decision. We shouldn't do that. It's not fair to them, and it's really not fair to the Lord either.
No, and Jesus never did that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're totally right. Well, I think we're really just kind of about at the time to wrap up. Do you have anything else that you would like to close out with, that you would like people to know? You've got an audience here.
There you
people
go.
to listen. So what do you wish they knew?
Speaking about Christians, we're talking about converting people, but as far as the emphasis in Christianity, sometimes we don't balance that. God is a spirit; they that worship must worship in spirit and truth. I think sometimes conservative groups like ours emphasize the truth and not so much the spirit, the heart part of it. And I would say that for Christians, that's something that needs to be considered a lot. It's important. Is that we not only do it accurately, but we do it from our hearts, and that we be renewed in the spirit of our mind, like it says over in Ephesians 4, I think. That's really trying to become like Christ from the inside. Christianity starts from the heart, and then it needs to be accurate too, but that loving God, we know that great commandment. That's not easy to do. Loving each other, not easy to do, but those are both heart behaviors that we have to have and need to learn how to do. So for those who are Christians, I think concentrating on that a lot is important, because those are the fundamentals, I think, of a Christian's life. And I'm working on it. I haven't got it down yet, but I'm working on it.
You and me both. That's the thing, right? That's the charge. And you're right. It's worship in spirit and truth. It's got to be a fully engaged human being, not just your mind. We're not disembodied brains.
No.
So it's got to be all of us. So huge point. Bill, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this with me. And for all of those who are watching at home, we are going to continue to do this every Thursday. Next Thursday at 3 p.m. The plan is Steve Grimes. So we're moving from an elder at Sumner, to elder at Monroe. So Steve Grimes has a slightly different story. His story is one where he was raised in a Christian home, and what led to him obeying the gospel, growing up in a home where others had already done so. So we will look at that and talk to him about that. But that's Thursdays at 3 o'clock. Thank you so much. And
thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. It was a privilege.
Oh, absolutely wonderful to have you. And thanks so much. And